Hi, my name is Katie Yamasaki, and I'm here today to talk to you about my new book, Dad Bakes, with Norton Young Readers. I made Dad Bakes after having many experiences doing mural projects and working with different people who were incarcerated. I was working with a lot of mothers and fathers who were in prison or in jail or some other correctional facility, and I was also working with their children and young people on the outside who had been impacted by incarceration. And with all of my projects and all of my partnerships with people who were in prison and incarcerated, one thing that I found and one thing I loved about these projects is that you begin to get to know people a little bit better. And just like for any of us, there is more than one thing that makes us who we are. The same is true of mothers and fathers who find themselves incarcerated. The difference is that a lot of the time, once somebody becomes incarcerated, they kind of have this one defining quality that society labels upon them, which is inmate or criminal or felon or something like that. And so all of these other pieces of who they are, of what makes them a human being, kind of get erased with that incarceration. And I kind of wanted to create a book where young people who may have a parent who's incarcerated, or that parent who's incarcerated themselves, can kind of see themselves and see the vastness of that person they love so much reflected back to them in the pages. Because kids always know their parents to be more than any one thing, as we all do. So in Dad Bakes, the father, you'll see he's a gardener, and he's a baker, and he's a cat lover, and he loves to play dress up and pretend. He's a soccer player and a movie lover. So there are all these things that make him who he is. And we find out later that being incarcerated is a piece of his story, but it certainly isn't the only story. So I've had these conversations with mothers and fathers in prison who are deeply, deeply missing their children. And it's such a poignant relationship, and one that is also a big reason why when people return home from prison, how they're able to stay home and not reoffend and not kind of recidivate and go back to prison. So what I hope is that this book will help to strengthen all of those bonds and help to support people and help to address the stigma that so many parents feel when they come home from prison, and so many children feel when they're in their schools and in their communities and don't really know how to talk about the fact that their parent is away in this way. And so I made this book for those families, and also for the rest of, for the rest of the schools and the rest of the kids who kind of need to know what are the different things that their peers in their communities are facing. I relate to this topic of incarceration and kind of family separation, not from my own firsthand experience, but kind of from experience of my family. I'm Japanese American, and so during World War II, along with over 120,000 other Japanese Americans, my family was sent to internment camps, which they called camps, but they were really prisons in the desert. And so the idea that you could be incarcerated not for what you've done, but for who you are, it definitely has an impact on me. And what I've seen over generations is that when your country, your government, or your society deems you untrustworthy, deems you suspicious, deems you unworthy of what everyday people, our basic human rights, deserve, it has a lasting impact. And I've seen people in my family over generations kind of trying to go above and beyond to prove their worth in a way that I think is really unfortunate and unhealthy. And I know that we are dealing with a crisis of mass incarceration in this country and have been for such a long time. And I think that any time we stop seeing each other just as the human beings that we are, or that we just let people fall out of our line of sight in our day-to-day lives, it becomes a problem. So I hope with Dad Bakes is that it is a reminder of all the people that we don't see on a day-to-day basis, that they are still worthy of our thoughts and our considerations when we're trying to build this better world. I always think about when the Japanese Americans were being taken to the camps, they were in these buses or trains that had covered windows, just kind of driving through all these towns through the middle of the country. And, as people kind of went through their daily life, these trains would be passing by with people whose lives were literally kind of falling apart at that time, and people whose rights were being denied right in front of our faces, but behind covered windows. And I think about that because those things are happening all the time. And so when I think about people in prison and I think about their children who go largely unseen by kind of legislators and people making the rules and maybe people teaching the classes, I think, oh, we have to keep all of these people in mind, because it is literally millions of people every day who are impacted by incarceration. So that's, one way I have a very kind of tender and poignant spot inside of me for thinking about the ways that incarceration impacts communities over time. And this is kind of my small contribution to hope to destigmatize things and help people be seen in the books that they come across every day. So one thing that I did in Dad Bakes was that I did not put the word jail or prison or incarceration into the book at all until the author's note. Because, and you have a little hint in the beginning that this father is separated, because what you see is our main character, the child, you see her reading with her box of letters, you see her with pictures of her father, and her box that says Papa. But we don't really know what that's about in the beginning of the book, and then at the end of the book, it kind of tells a little bit more about the story of this family, and the story of so many families in our country. And I did that on purpose because, as I've mentioned at different points, oftentimes when people go to prison or become incarcerated, they all of a sudden have one single defining factor that society labels them, and that is prisoner or inmate or criminal. And nobody is any one thing. We all contain so many things, and that goes for people living their best life, and that also goes for people who are struggling with something as traumatic as being incarcerated, okay, and dealing with the consequences of a terrible moment. And so I really wanted the reader to be able to kind of see this father character really clearly as a complex human being with complex interests and diverse things that he likes to do and interesting ways that he's a father. I wanted them to be able to see that he loves to grow things. There are plants everywhere. He loves to groom his cat. He loves to cook for his daughter and surprise her. He loves his tattoos. He's got tattoos everywhere. And I wanted the reader to really be able to see that before, at the end of the book, they read the author's note and say, oh, this is a family who's impacted by incarceration. Because at that point, what I hope is that the reader will think, oh, this is just a deepening of the story, okay? I always hope that people can kind of get to know somebody before they pass an immediate judgment on them. And I think that a lot of the time people who've been involved in the carceral system are not afforded that luxury. They put on that jumpsuit and they have a single label, even if they are so many more things. So that's why I kind of put the author's note at the back to let the reader and to let the child reader and the parent reader really get to know this dad before deepening their understanding about who he is and what that family's experience has been. I've been really lucky to kind of bear witness to this reentry process for a lot of people and to hear their stories. And I'm always really moved by kind of like the small moments that I showed a lot in Dad Bakes, but the small moments of connection that kind of stitch together this thread of rebuilding a life, baking with your child, or grooming your cat with your child, or listening to music with your child. All of these kind of simple things I find to be incredibly moving, because those are the things of daily life together. But the other thing that really, really inspires me are all of the people who come home from prison and then basically turn their attention directly back to the prison to work at as hard as they can at abolishing these systems that really unjustly criminalize poor people and people of color, among others. And so it's inspiring to see people who know that when they come out of this traumatic experience of being incarcerated, that their healing is intertwined with the freedom and justice of the people who they left behind who remain incarcerated. Being able to witness that is like a constant kind of perspective for me, and also just kind of helps me keep top of mind that we all belong to each other. And nobody's ever shown me that quite in that same way. And I'm so grateful for this work, for all of the projects I've been able to do, but also for this book, which I hope is going to reach a lot of families who will see themselves in these pages. Thank you.